Well, welcome back to Let Us Go Deeper. This is your friend and servant, Pastor Skip Olson, as we delve into these prophecies of Daniel. And one might even ask the question, why do we need to study the prophecies of Daniel? Considering that this was a book written so long ago, prophecies that were given so long ago. But to answer that question, I will ask you this question. Have you ever wanted to scream yet? Is anybody in charge? Or perhaps you said, God, have you fallen asleep at the wheel? What's really happening in the world today? If you have, you will understand my own concern, my own anxiety sometimes. I confess, I sometimes feel fearful about what I see happening in the world today. And this recent posturing between Iran and America, the possibility of a war, has me concerned. And not only me, I've heard others say, what is going to happen? Will there be a war? How will the fighting be? And even as Australia burns, Indonesia is being inundated with rain. The Caribbean just suffered great devastation by a hurricane just last year. And you have to confess, somehow there's an uneasiness about the world we live in today. And as a Christian, as a seeker, you're probably asking yourself the question, what's happening? Well, in the context of the uncertainty of the world, in the context of the anxiety and fear, the Bible says fear will come into the hearts of men. We must see the prophecies of Daniel. These are prophecies we call apocalyptic prophecies. Apocalyptic in that they remove the veil and show you that hand behind everything else that is guiding. A great scripture to have in heart and mind is Isaiah 46:10, where God says, declaring the end from the beginning and saying, my counsel will prevail. In other words, God is saying, I will get done what I need to get done. My agenda will finally and ultimately be done. And one of the great examples of this is our friend Joseph. Remember Joseph? His brothers had sold him into slavery. They were going to kill him, actually. They thought that by getting rid of him, his dream of his brothers bowing to him would never be fulfilled. And yet, Joseph tells them in Genesis 50 verse 20, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. In other words, you sought to undo God's plan for my life. You thought to go directly in opposition to what God wanted for my life. And yet by the very thing that you did, you advanced God's plan for my life. What wisdom, what ability God has to take even the negative things and turn them into positive things to advance his agenda. So apocalyptic prophecy, of which Daniel is a key example and in Revelation, is actually saying God will get his way. Behind all the chaos, the confusion, the uncertainty, there is someone guiding, someone who is directing things. And ultimately, his will is going to prevail. And perhaps for no other reason than that, we should study the prophecies of Daniel within its context. Now, what was the context, you may say, of Daniel's prophecy? Well, the Jews, God's people, were taken captive. Daniel chapter 1 says, God gave Jehoiakim into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. That's a good thing to think about right there. Even a defeat, even something that seemed disastrous, God is still working. It says God gave Jehoiakim into Nebuchadnezzar's hand. Why? Well, the Jews had really strayed. There was a lot of violence, corruption taking place. And this was God's discipline. God whipping them into shape. God even preserving them in some ways from the corruption that was internally destroying the kingdom. So Daniel recognizes that even in that negativity, God's hand is in control, is working things out. And oftentimes, the innocent suffer from the misdeeds of the unrighteous or others. So Daniel, who is a good young man, he and his friends, and many other righteous Jews, I am sure, find themselves on the road, a 1,000-mile trek to Babylon. Not because of what they did, but because of what someone else did. That is life. And even today, we suffer economic downturn because of decisions made by our representatives. Our business goes under because of what the bosses did. Enron, Bernie Madoff. Somebody gets sick. Someone gets in an accident because some drunken driver. In this world, many times the innocent suffer from the misdeeds of others. It's just part of the fabric of this life. And it will do us well to accept that reality and, like Daniel, ask and see God's hand still working in the negativity. Our prayer should always be like Jesus prayed, Lord, let your will be done. But in a sense, saying, Father, give me discernment to see your will being done even in the negative. So this war that might happen with Iraq, could we pray and say, Lord, help us to see your will being done even in this? The devastation in the Caribbean, could we pray and say, Lord, help us to see your will in this? So Daniel is in Babylon, and his people are wondering and questioning. And King Nebuchadnezzar is also questioning what will be in the latter days. Will my kingdom, my great kingdom, continue forever? In that kind of context of war, oppression, slavery, etc., God gives a message, both to the pagan king Nebuchadnezzar and later to his own servant Daniel. Because he's trying to save a pagan king, even as he is seeking to encourage his own people. So apocalyptic prophecy, which are non-conditional, they have nothing to do with what man does. In fact, that's the whole idea about these prophecies. It shows that it doesn't matter what man does. For or against God's revealed will, he gets his way in the end. That's a great comfort too. That it doesn't matter what happens, God still wins in the end. So these prophecies are given to encourage, to save, to be a conscience to the wicked and the oppressors. Yes, there is a judge, there is someone in control. You will have to answer for what you're doing. A judge who will mete out righteous judgment. So it's a conscience and a warning to the wicked as well. These are apocalyptic prophecies that we see. But I must mention a little caveat. In studying these prophecies, we must beware of not looking at them as a sort of ball by ball, turn by turn GPS into the future. These prophecies were really meant to be broad brushstrokes, landmarks even along the course of history. Picture this. You're going to a strange place. You really don't know where you're going. So someone decides, I'm going to give you directions. So they said, you'll drive, let's say, 6 miles. Then you will see a great billboard, a Nike billboard. At that billboard, turn left. And then you'll drive to a 7-Eleven, turn right, etc. Now, you really don't know where you're going. You have an idea what you might expect to see, but you really don't know where you're going. So you're driving, and then, wow, there is the Nike billboard. Wow, I'm in the right place. I'm on the right road. You turn left. But then you're driving, and it seems, am I lost? I'm not seeing that 7-Eleven. These roads look strange. Am I lost? And then, out of nowhere, there's a 7-Eleven. And as you look to the right, you see that traffic light, that church that the person mentioned. Wow, I'm in the right place. That is what apocalyptic prophecy does for God's people. It says things are unfolding as they should. When you see certain things happen, know that things are unfolding as they should. History is following God's own eternal sovereign plan. Because of that, we need to be aware of trying to pinpoint a particular person, event, or anything like that through apocalyptic prophecies, because these are broad brushstrokes that deal with hundreds of years and institutions rather than people or any single event. In fact, prophecy is only fully understood when it happens. Even Daniel didn't know what he was talking about. In fact, the angel told him, you go to rest until the end, for this is not for your time even. Similarly, when we recognize that these prophecies are like symbolic, beasts and dragons and different elements that are not even real, it becomes even more difficult to pinpoint any one thing. So we need to recognize, therefore, it will be dangerous to try to use these prophecies to say, we are at this point, we are at that point, we need to set this date, or this is the person who will do that, or anything like that. And remember, you only really know prophecy has been fulfilled after it has been fulfilled. And you see how it matches up with what was said by the prophets. So with that kind of backdrop into Daniel, let's make our journey. And I really promise you, it should be a soul-stirring, fulfilling, encouraging study into this ancient book. So Daniel chapter 1 begins, like I mentioned before, with the Israelites being taken siege and being taken into Babylon. So Daniel and his friends get to Babylon. These are like the brightest and the best from Jerusalem that the king has taken. A very astute political move, I must say. Nebuchadnezzar recognized, if I could take the brightest and the best and train them and orient them, indoctrinate them into my Babylonian way of thinking, I will have allies, people to advance my kingdom even. And I won't have to worry about uprising and rebellion, because first of all, the people I left back in Jerusalem, the poor, the uneducated, the resourceless, I don't have to worry about them. As long as I have my puppet king back there, I don't have to worry. But these young, bright, vibrant ones could be a trouble. But more than that, I am actually creating a new generation of loyal Babylonians. And the first thing he does to do that is to change their names. Then he is going to feed them provision and then educate them. So check something out. I changed their names to Babylonian names. I divorce them from their culture, their language, their roots. I feed them. So now I become their provider, their sustainer, the one they look to for sustenance. And then I educate them in my ways. So my philosophies, my theology, everything, I'm now dumping into their minds and creating, like I said, a new generation of Babylonians, because these were young men, 17, 18, 19, Daniel and his friends. When you name something, you are showing control and authority over that thing. I'm sure you've seen some babies with some weird names. You say, but who gave the baby such a foolish name or such a weird name, such a strange name? The parents. Why? Because it's their child. When you name a building, when you name a street, when you name anything, it shows I have authority. So subtly, by changing their names, Nebuchadnezzar is saying, I now control you. But more than that, by giving them a new language with that name, I have erased your roots. You're no longer speaking Hebrew, you're speaking Aramaic. And now I'm feeding you, symbol of my sustenance. You depend on me to live. And now I'm educating you. Do you see how that relates to us today living in a secular world? Do you see how many times, even though we say we believe in Jesus Christ and we trust God, yet we put more confidence in our bosses? The same person who finds it difficult to get up early to go to church, let's say, or to go to a prayer meeting, will not find it difficult to get up to go to work because that's my job. The same person who finds he has no time to volunteer at church or to do something, let's say, spiritually related, finds the time to get to work, to do what the boss says, to do that extra task, to work overtime, whatever have you, because that's my job. I need my job. My sustenance comes from my job. And do you realize that many times our philosophies, our concepts are what we get from the universities and the colleges where we study? Our attitude towards, let's say, homosexuality, transgenderism, politics, you name it, is what we are imbibing all the time. So we see a very strong parallel between Daniel and his friends and us today. So what does Daniel do? He keeps a conscious knowledge of his own name. A rather interesting thing I noticed as I read Daniel, when he refers to himself and his friends, he uses their Hebrew names: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. When Nebuchadnezzar refers to them, he refers to them by their Babylonian names. If you read the book of Daniel, some of it is written in Hebrew and other parts are written in Aramaic. Daniel was bilingual. But I see that sort of symbolically in that he could speak the language of the Jews. He has his roots. He knows Torah. He understands God's will. He understands God's instruction. But he can also speak the language of Babylon. It's like you and I. You don't believe in evolution. You probably don't believe in transgenderism, homosexuality and stuff. But yet, when you go to university, when you go to college, when you deal with the world, you need to know these things. If you're going to get that bachelor's in science, in biology, you better be able to talk about Darwin and what he says. But it's one thing to be able to speak the language of your college, of your university, but to maintain your own language, your own root, your own source of your knowledge and being. That is what Daniel and his friends were able to navigate. Learn the language, learn the culture, learn the knowledge of Babylon while maintaining the knowledge of the true God. Which is why when in chapter 1, verse 18 or so, when they appear before Nebuchadnezzar, he finds them more excellent, more knowledgeable than all the other trainees. They had learnt the language of the Babylonians, but they never lost their root, their core. Can we do that today? Our young people, when they leave our churches, are we preparing them to be bilingual, so to speak? To maintain their spiritual roots, even as they navigate the corridors of academia or their job or politics, whatever have you? The other thing has to do with Daniel and his friends' refusal to eat the food presented to them by the king. Many people believe it was because food would have been offered to idols, They refused to do that. And that would be a very valid reason. Some others say it could have been unclean food, like maybe pig and other foods that God had said we shouldn't eat. And that too would be very valid. But I would like to challenge us to go in beyond that. That Daniel and his friends refused to eat the king's food. Number one, in an act of defiance to the philosophy that you are my sustainer. But also, had they eaten that food, the testimony, the witness would have been that they were bowing down to the gods and the powers of Babylon. You see, I could know eating food offered to idols is nothing. I could know that within me. I could know that walking into a bar means nothing to me. I could know personally that, you name any one of these sort of questionable activity where I know personally it doesn't affect me. It doesn't have anything to do with my relationship with God. But what witness am I giving? When I do this, what am I telling those who observe me? So Daniel and his friends were defying the king's desire, the king's intention of indoctrinating them into depending on him as their sustainer. And how would they do it? By leaving the rich, nutritious food that the king was offering and saying, let's eat simple beans and vegetables and water. Of course, the eunuch said, hey guys, you want me to lose my head? Daniel said, no, let's do it for 10 days. Let's see. And in 10 days, they were more muscular, fairer, intelligent, more bright-eyed than everybody else. So the guy said, okay, then so be it. Trust me, it wasn't just the diet. It was the fact that they weren't eating that and eating this that brought that. It was a miracle of God in recognition of their faith and their decision to defy the prevailing philosophy that you are my sustainer, and to keep their allegiance to God as the one who is sustaining them and building them up. And the third thing is in their education. Yes, they would go to school. Yes, they would learn, but never lose their sense of who they were. Something that struck me very strongly as I read Daniel chapter 1 especially is the fact that they were brought into favor. It says in verse 10 that God brought them into favor with the prince of the eunuchs. Think about that. Daniel and his friends won him over in order to win him over. You cannot win people over if you're aggressive, if you're disrespectful, if you're harsh, if you're confrontational. Daniel and his friends would be loyal to Yahweh, loyal to their God, not by opposing, defying in a rebellious manner their captors, their trainers, their leaders, but by being respectful, courteous, and kind. It kind of reminds you of Joseph, doesn't it? In Potiphar's house, he was such a good worker. Potiphar's business began to grow. Potiphar said, man, I have never had it so good until you came to work for me. I could trust you. No Christian who is worth his salt should be aggressive, should be oppositional and confrontational. Like I like to say, don't use a man's 8 hours that he's paying you for to give a Bible study. Don't use your work time to read your Bible. You don't have to confront people. Witness for God by being kind and courteous. Win them over in order to win them over. And we will see this being played out with Daniel and King Nebuchadnezzar, with Daniel and King Darius. He won them over by having won them over. That's a lesson for us in today's world, in a pluralistic society, in a place where we are being bombarded by other philosophies, where there are different views, religious views being bandied about. Let's remember, you catch flies with honey rather than with vinegar. You win people over by courtesy and kindness rather than by winning them, by beating them over with your scriptures and to show I know more than you. It was that attitude that allowed Daniel and his friends to impress the eunuch enough for him to put his life at risk for them. And later on, we'll see in chapter 2, when we look at chapter 2 in our next episode, when the great decree from the king came out to destroy all the wise men, the astrologers, and all of these high officials, it was their appeal that stayed the king's hands. If you win people over, you can always win them over. And how do you win them over? By courtesy, by kindness, by respectfulness, by being diligent in what you do. So basically, when I look at Daniel chapter 1 as a preface to all that he's going to share with us prophetically, I recognize that his personal life is a reflection, a representation, a parallel of the great controversy, of the great forces of good and evil in opposition, of God's people in general as they face the powers of the world in every age, in any time in which you live. We come up against the forces of this world, and how we stand will determine the witness we give to others for God's kingdom, for God's glory. And like I said, even to win them over. And we will see this playing out so nicely with Daniel. My prayer is that as we go through the book of Daniel, we will go beyond trying to pinpoint dates and events and kingdoms and stuff and see what God was telling Daniel and his contemporaries through this prophecy. What he was telling the Jews, even Christ's time, for Christ will refer to Daniel's prophecy in Matthew chapter 24. He said, when you see the abomination of desolation as spoken by the prophet Daniel, what he was trying to tell us is what he was trying to tell them. I'm in control. I'm looking out for you. Ups and down, back and forth, no matter what is happening, keep the faith. Keep trusting. I'm going to win this after all, and you are going to win with me. And finally, God worked very dramatically for Daniel and his friends by making them more wise, by making them more physically strong, by revealing dreams and stuff to them. For it says God gave them this wisdom, and God gave them this ability to interpret dreams and vision, referring particularly to Daniel, because he is sovereign. Sometimes in standing firm for God, in opposing the powers that be, maybe not working on that Sabbath day because you say, no, I cannot violate the Sabbath. Maybe not telling that lie for your boss. Maybe not entering into that suspicious activity in order to keep your job. Maybe in resisting, whatever it might be. God may come through so forcefully, so dramatically. Immediately people are impressed, like, wow, this man's God. Maybe that sickness, that cancer is healed miraculously, that disease, and everybody's like, hooray for God. But there are times when God doesn't work as quickly. Sometimes it's a slower process, like with Joseph. It took, 13 years or so for him to actually become prince of Egypt. But there are times when it's even slower. Sometimes he doesn't do anything miraculous, like with John the Baptist, a faithful servant who stood up to King Herod, and God didn't save him. So the question isn't, will God do this for me? If I stand up, would God do a miracle? Will I keep my job? Will I get that promotion? Will I do this? No, the question is, are you committed? Are you loyal to God for being God? For being your master, your Lord, your creator, your savior? God is the one who determines if, when, and how he will act on our behalf. Our duty is to be faithful, to be committed, to be loyal. I hope you and I, facing the world we face, the uncertain economic conditions, uncertainty of keeping your job, that you and I, facing this really uncertain world in which we live, will hold on to the one great certainty that you and I have. Our God reigns in heaven above, and he ultimately will get what he wants, because his counsel will always prevail.